Talk about remote ID. Oh boy, Mark, thank you for your super chats. Uh, okay, here's a rant about remote ID. Remote ID is coming. September 2023 will be the date of compliance for people in the United States for users, not manufacturers. Manufacturers are supposed to have been compliant as of September 2022. If you look at all of the FPV ready-to-fly manufacturers, none of them have remote ID built in. None of them are complying. They are either located outside the United States and hoping that if they just go la 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 la, the FPV won't come after the FAA won't come after them. That's personal conjecture. That's not based on official communication from them. Or they're located inside the United States and they're doing things like Rotor Riot, where they sell them and they say this is for use, indoor use only, with a FRIA only, and so they act like they don't have to comply, to which I say Godspeed, and I look forward to finding out if the FAA will agree with that interpretation. It would be nice if they did, but I suspect that they won't. I feel like many individuals will take the same approach. The reality is that the FAA doesn't have near enough resources to prosecute everyone who violates the rules. I suspect that a lot of people come September 2023 will do exactly what they have always done. They will pretend remote ID doesn't exist. They will be in violation of the rules. Some of them will get fined, and many of them will never think of it again. High-profile people, like me, will not have that luxury. If I am obviously not complying with the rules, I will probably be one of the first ones to get dinged. In fact, depending on how vindictive the FAA is feeling, I wonder if come September 2023, I will quickly get a letter from them. I wonder if I'm on their radar. I don't know. Maybe that's presumptuous of me to assume they know who I am. But if anybody in the FPV world is going to get attention, it's going to be people making content, because the FAA is concerned about public perception and public education. And so they want people making content about drones to be communicating their message to the public. And so I won't be just pretending it doesn't exist. I will be complying. At the very least, I will be maintaining plausible deniability that I am complying, or actually complying. One of the two, and I'm not saying which it is. What remote ID will mean for you if you choose to comply will be that you'll need to have a remote ID transponder on your drone. The exact nature of that still remains to be seen. There are some that are in development that are very small, very light, and not too expensive. And they plug into your existing GPS unit. So if you have a quad without a GPS unit, then you have a problem. But if you have a quad with an existing GPS unit, they go inline in between the GPS unit and the flight controller, and they read the GPS data. And the company making them thinks that this will be deemed compliant and will be sufficient to be compliant. We'll see. I think that right now, people are like, why don't you make a video about how to comply with remote ID? Because I think enough's going to change between May, it's now May 1st. Enough's going to change between May and September that I think that any information you have now is still premature. But we shall see. Mike Bergman, let's hope. I don't see that happening. I don't see that happening. The FAA's game plan for enforcement is to get local law enforcement, to refer cases to them. And they just don't have enough people to do all the work of everybody by themselves. James Reedy says, I don't like getting insurance tickets, so I got insurance. I'll probably like to keep my right to fly, and at some point I will get remote ID. Yeah, there's definitely, I don't think that compliance is as much of a OMG deal breaker as some people make it out to be. it will be a little bit of money and a little bit of weight. I think that there are situations where it's more of a deal breaker. Like if you're a Part 107 operator, you need remote ID on all of your aircraft, even the ones that are under 250 grams. So if you fly a little 150 gram 95 millimeter with an Insta360, what is it? A freaking Insta360 Go, though that's the one, right? You technically need a remote ID device on it, and that could be, 25 grams or 20 grams all by itself. It's kind of ridiculous. But for a lot of people, I think that it will be possible to comply and to continue to enjoy the hobby exactly as you do. Dream Free FPV, the requirement that you not be able to tamper with, Blunty, I hate to put you on the spot because you're only the producer of this show and you're not actually like here in your role as a FPVFC member. But do you know the exact wording that he's referring to? Is it tamper resistant? What's the wording, if you know it?
I don't know it offhand, but it's very vague. That's the best way to put it. Is once you look up the wording, it's extremely vague. It doesn't exactly specify how that tamper resistance would be shown. For instance, you can look at the new product, the Drone Tag DRI. Mm-hmm. The Drone Tag DRI goes between your GPS and the flight controller, but it doesn't know your GPS signal is real. It's just taking data over a UART, and then it's sending its data through. Other people consider that maybe it doesn't even mean tamper of the GPS. Maybe it only means tamper of the device, whereas in like, if you tamper with the signal that it's sending, that's a problem. Otherwise, it's not a problem at all. And if you're tampering with the data the signal's sending versus the actual signal, is that tampering or not? Right? There's a lot of questions like that, and none of that is clear at all. Also, the other thing to consider is all these devices are not being vetted. All the companies do is fill out a form, the ASTM requirements. They say that they've passed all the tests. Whether they've done that or not is up to them. They submit that to the FAA, and then it is approved automatically with a rubber stamp.
Right. So the fact that a remote ID device has a declaration of compliance doesn't yet mean that it actually has been vetted by the FAA and is good to go. The FAA is taking a perspective of basically approving every device that is applied, and then later they'll go back and look and go, wait, no, you can't do that. So it's very vague and we don't know, but it's possible that the tamper-resistant requirement will be more lenient than the most strict thing we could imagine. And in that case, perhaps, I certainly wouldn't count on it because the FAA certainly doesn't have a great track record of doing things that we're happy with, but there you go. Black Jungle says, wait, local law enforcement enforcing federal regulations, wouldn't that be a little sketchy? Local law enforcement isn't enforcing the regulation. You are right. Only the federal agency can enforce the federal regulation. What will happen is that local law enforcement will be, let's imagine a scenario where a factory is violating the EPA by dumping chemicals into a lake, okay? Let's say that a police officer witnesses the factory dumping chemicals into the lake. At that point, the police officer can collect evidence. The police officer can take that evidence and report that to the EPA. And now the police officer has referred the case to the EPA and has helped them gather evidence to help them prosecute the case. That's what the FAA is doing with their LEAP program, Law Enforcement Activity. I don't know what it stands for. The idea is that the FAA will educate local law enforcement about the federal rules, and then the law enforcement can say, who are you? What are you doing? Okay, so on such and such a date, such and such a person was observed to be flying a drone. The drone did not have a FAA identifier on it, and the person did not have a trust test. And so then they take all that information and they refer it to the FAA, and then you get a call from the FAA who prosecutes the case. That's how it will work, and there's nothing illegal about that. Streets FPV wants to know how informed cops will be on the subject. Well, the FAA is actively working to educate them because the FAA wants them to do their work for them. What do you think about half complying with remote ID? For example, if I made my own broadcast module, so PyDog, at that point, you might be able to pretend that you had a valid remote ID module on your aircraft, because if a nosy person or a cop came around and pulled out their cell phone and they brought up the remote ID app, it would show that you were broadcasting information. And they might not go further and say, what is that, and check whether it's actually approved. The FAA would do that. It's possible that there are some scenarios where that would allow you to avoid trouble, but obviously no one can predict what that would be. Can't the remote ID be spoofed? Yeah. So there are all different ways to spoof this. The way that you would get caught would be if you were caught doing it and your drone was like collected and used as evidence or confiscated, and then it was determined by an FAA investigator that you didn't have a valid remote ID device on it. That is pretty far-fetched, but that's not impossible. Jason Hind wants to know, how can you verify that your remote ID module is even working? I assume you will use so the remote ID module will broadcast the information that it's required to broadcast. It broadcasts it using typically like low energy Bluetooth or long range Bluetooth. And it can be picked up by cell phones and other devices with Wi-Fi chipsets and Bluetooth chipsets in them. So presumably there will be an app that's publicly available that anyone can download that will show the remote ID information being broadcast in the local area. And that's how, presumably, again, we're just guessing here, because much of this stuff doesn't exist yet. Yeah, Blunty.
Also, it's a requirement of the ASTM if they did the checklist properly. The module has to indicate to you in some way, without aid, that it is working properly. Like it basically has an LED indicator or a beep or like an app that it forces you to use to make it work. But either of those things will communicate to you the status of the remote ID module and like tell you, okay, we're good to take off.
Gotcha. Greg Gerber says most people fly without a visual observer some of the time, and I've never heard of the FAA coming after anybody for that. Greg, that is not true. Damn, Blunty, I can't. I mean, is that one of the things that Philly Mikey got dinged for? I don't know. He got dinged for a lot of things.
Yeah. So I think if you add the context of, I've never heard of someone getting in trouble without a VO in person and not posting videos on YouTube, I think maybe that's accurate. Like there aren't people rolling around checking the spots, and you're not going to typically get in trouble for an FAA rule like that by a cop in the area. However, like you're saying, there have been situations like Philly Mikey, trying to remember his actual name, but Philly Drone Life, something like that.
Yeah, that's him. That's Philly Mikey.
Okay.
Philly Drone Life.
Yeah. Yes. But like people like him, I believe some of the tack-on violations were lack of visual observer, including, I believe, also like lack of the registration they needed him to have, and like there were other things there. But I think those are more tack-on things. Like nobody's patrolling your local area yet. We assume they probably won't be at all, but and random folks aren't getting in trouble for it.
The main way people get dinged today is that content is posted on YouTube or the other places on the internet. Then someone else gets annoyed and reports you to the FAA, and then it is egregious enough that you rise to the top of the FAA's pile of who are we going to mess with today. I've only heard of one case where FAA showed up at a flight field and asked people to see their registration. It was the San Diego field, I think. I actually flew there with Rotor Riot once, and we shot an episode. As one case in all of history. However, if the FAA has their way, more cops will be aware of this. And what's going to happen is that you're going to be flying somewhere and someone's going to be annoyed and call the cops on you. And then the cops will come hassle you. And that we know that happens. We've seen lots of Ken Heron videos where cops come hassle him. Now, Ken is a little bit of a troublemaker, I would say, and he'll be flying somewhere like a state capital where he has the right to fly, but also where there's plenty of police who are definitely going to give him a hard time. And, he stands up for his rights. But that's a situation where a cop would come and say, hey, do you have what you're supposed to have?
One more thing I want to add real quick on that is that I would expect to see at most major drone events moving forward, a LEAP agent from the FAA attempting to attend the event and then possibly doing enforcement on site. I can't guarantee
plausible.
that, but that's what we've
plausible.
heard from LEAP agents. That's what we've heard that they are
So you're
interested
talking
in doing.
Drone nationals, multi-G, IO, that kind of thing. Rampage, perhaps.
Yes, correct. Yes.
Ouch. I mean, ouch. All they have to do is buy a ticket, and then they show up, and then they're like, "Hey, I'm with the FAA. Do you have your whatever?" Wow.
Yeah.
That's going to be.
I mean, again, I can't confirm that will happen, but that is what they've been indicating to us in meetings and talking to different people. So.
Wow. Suck. Okay. Well, that's good to know, but also that sucks. One more question on this topic, then we're going to move on from this topic. Iwandi says, for racing, my multi-GP chapter commonly flies an almost sub 250 ultralight 5-inch. So racing with sub 250 will be totally possible. Iwandi, as long as there is no prize for the race, you're right. As soon as there's a prize for the race, it's a 107 operation, and then remote ID is required regardless of weight. So, sucks to be you. Quad City Bay Area asks, what's the FAA's reason for these new rules? Money? Power? Thank you for a $5 donation, Quad City Bay Area. Also, thank you for another $2 donation. The FAA's reason for these rules is, let's not forget, that Congress told them to do it. Congress mandated that the FAA implement a remote ID in the FAA Reauthorization Act, which is people ask, how does the FAA, a federal regulatory body, have the authority to make all these rules? And the answer is that the Congress passes and the president signs a law that it's the FAA Reauthorization Act. They do it every, Valenti, what is it, 5 years?
I believe that's correct, but sometimes there's delays and weirdness and extensions and stuff.
Yeah. So they reauthorize the FAA every 5 years, and that Reauthorization Act, Congress tells the FAA, here are the things that you should do in the next 5 years. And that is where the FAA derives its legislative authority to enact this and enforce this regulation. And so when Congress said, there are some people who speculate that the FAA would rather have not dealt with all this drone bullshit and would have rather kept on regulating aircraft. But the Congress said, drones are a big deal, do something about them. And the FAA had no choice but to comply. So as far as, are they motivated by money and power? I think everyone is. So, but mostly I think they are motivated by a desire, because does the FAA get money from Jeff Bezos? People are like, it's Jeff Bezos. How does he, does a federal regulation is not like an elected representative that a lobbyist is going to come and plunk money in their campaign chest. I don't know the ins and outs of Washington, but I feel like federal regulations are more insulated from the influence of business and so forth in some ways. I don't know. Maybe that's naive. I think that they're just trying to, do what they're told to do in a very clunky and weird way that is out of touch from the realities of what we're doing. But it's not like the king of the FAA woke up one morning and went, "Today I will screw over drone users. Yes, 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 they've lived in freedom for too long." Congress told him to do it.
I would also remind you, this is something, there are police officers who do heavy enforcement, who do light enforcement, who let people off, who get every single ticket, who sit out at speed traps and try to get every single ticket possible, who are mean to people, who are super nice. That's the same thing with everyone in every government employee position. There's going to be people who are super stoked about their job and think that they need to do exactly the enforcements on the books. There are people who think we just need to make sure the best thing goes forward and we do the best thing for safety. Some people think, we need to do the best thing for freedom. These are all their own people. people with their own opinions and doing the best they can within the bounds to do the thing they want to do. I just want to remind you of that because, like you said, we can often demonize the FAA, but really they're kind of just people doing jobs in different ways. Yeah. And they're doing the jobs they were kind of made to do based on rules.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point. Good point.